Welcome to you, Stanley Jordan.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Lee.
I always say that Stanley Jordan is the Michael Jordan of guitar. And you're here going to be in New York City doing 9 shows as part of a program called Healing Our Heroes for war veterans. Tell me about that.
Yes, originally we had the shows booked just as a regular, engagement at the Iridium. And then we got the idea to do this thing to honor the vets because they've given so much to us. And I'm involved in music therapy. I'm actually a student of music therapy. So this is right along the lines of the kind of stuff that we do in music therapy.
Tell me about growing up in the instrument of the guitar. You were successful at a very young age, and you had like a lot of impact when you came in. But tell me about even before that. How did you get introduced to the guitar?
Piano was actually my first instrument. My mother started my sister and me out playing classical piano, and I played for several years, and then at one point we had some difficult times in the family and my folks had to sell the piano. So for a few years there was no piano in the home, but I was able to persuade them to get me a guitar, and a lot of the music I was getting interested in at the time, R&B, blues, rock and roll, was very guitar oriented. So I figured, well, if I could play guitar, I could express that other side of my musical personality or whatever.
How old were you?
So that was when I was 11. Okay. I started playing guitar. And I loved it. I just really took to the guitar. But a couple of years later, I started to realize that I still missed a lot of the pianistic things that you could do on the piano. Like with the piano, you have more independence in terms of different lines all at the same time, what we call counterpoint. Also, the kinds of rich chords that you could play that you can't play on guitar. So I started to experiment with the guitar to try to figure out a way to do some of the pianistic stuff on the guitar, and that's how the touch technique came about.
Touch tapping, which we're going to talk about later, which is really extraordinarily brilliant. So you're an 11-year-old kid. At what point, when you were listening to R&B and a lot of the mainstream music, did you develop an interest for jazz? And then from there, at what point was it that your teacher started to tell you, hey, you actually have a talent in this area?
I was already interested in jazz from about the age of 10. I remember there was a radio station in our neighborhood that had a jazz show, and I used to listen to that. And it just goes to show, by the way, that young people are like a sponge, and they'll absorb whatever they're exposed to. So I think it's very important for all of us who are involved in media on any level to make sure that the young people are exposed to a wide range of things. So in my case, I heard this great jazz radio, and that got me into it. And at the age of 10, I went to a 3-day jazz festival. And at first, my father would go and he'd stay there for a while. He realized I was safe there, so he would just drop me off, and I was there all day listening to people like Herbie Hancock, Freddie Hubbard, Stanley Jordan, so many great, George Benson, so many great artists. And at the age of 10, that was just such a great experience for me. Now, that's when I was still playing piano, and I was still playing classical piano. Jazz, I didn't really understand it. The language of jazz is complex. I knew that I loved the music, but it wasn't for another couple of years that I started actually playing it myself.
Yeah, and in 1979 you were at Princeton. You were playing the guitar at Princeton, and I read that you actually played with Dizzy Gillespie.
Yes, and Benny Carter. For one semester, Benny Carter taught a course at Princeton, and I took the course. It was a joint course between the music department and American Studies, and it was kind of about jazz history mostly. So one day I kind of got my nerve up, and I went to his office and played for him, and they had a show coming up. He was going to be playing with Dizzy Gillespie, and I asked, was it okay if I sit in with you guys? And he said, sure. He was such a great guy, a real down-to-earth, amazing musician, by the way, too. So I got a chance to play with Benny Carter and Dizzy Gillespie, and it was kind of a life-changing thing for me because, they did their first set, okay? And then they brought me out at the beginning to do a little solo for the second set, and then we played together. And I could tell that the things that I did were inspiring to them. So the whole idea that I could actually inspire these greats was really, not lost on
Well, that was my next question. What did they think of you? Because here you were, this young kid up there playing the guitar in a very idiosyncratic way and getting sounds out of the instrument, playing the melody and the chorus at the same time, getting sounds out of the instrument that they probably hadn't seen too many people really be able to accomplish. So how did they encourage you? What did they say to you?
I'm sure I was the first person they'd seen playing that way, And,
right.
But the thing is, jazz music has always been a rich playground for creativity. I mean, like Benny and Dizzy, they themselves were really creative musicians. So that's one of the things that I love so much about jazz is it has a rich tradition, and at the same time, it's very open for creativity.
And you've also taken songs that were very mainstream, and you played them in your own way, keeping the dignity of jazz and keeping the authenticity of jazz. But what made you take a song like Stairway to Heaven and say, you know what, I'm going to use this in my set?
Well, these were the songs I always played. I mean, Stairway to Heaven was one of the first songs I learned on guitar, and to this day I still play it. I just played it last night in Pennsylvania, The thing is, it is true though that traditionally, the traditional vocabulary of jazz came from the Tin Pan Alley songs, like sort of from the first half of the 20th century pretty much. And at the time that I was just sort of coming out as a professional musician, a lot of people weren't playing those more recent songs. And in fact, when I signed to Blue Note, and the president of Blue Note, Bruce Lundvall, he made an observation. He said, I noticed that you like to play a lot of these more recent songs and you play them as standards, and that's something that a lot of people aren't doing. And it never really occurred to me that it was
you were
different.
young, right?
Because I was just...
How old were you?
Well, I was in my mid-20s.
Yeah.
This is when I signed to Blue Note. But the thing is, it never occurred to me that it was unusual to play those songs like Eleanor Rigby and so forth. And in fact, my second album on Blue Note is called Standards Volume 1. And that is a celebration of songs that I grew up listening to, and a lot of them were these more recent songs. Because I woke up thinking about this one day. I had been getting a lot of flack from some of the jazz critics because they were saying, how can you call yourself a jazz musician playing all these pop songs? And I was thinking about it, and I woke up thinking, you know what? These aren't pop songs, these are standards. These are my generation standards, and I'm gonna stand up for these songs, and that's what the album was all about.
Well, that was really my next question. Did you take some criticism from it? Because Miles Davis, for instance, was very critical of Wynton Marsalis. Now, this is a guy who is really and has played a major role in introducing jazz to an entire generation of young people, and to continue to innovate and to take it mainstream. Why are a lot of the straight ahead people in jazz and the jazz purists, why are they so critical, and do you think they're right?
When I grew up in the Bay Area, my main teacher was Elroy Jones, a guitarist from back in the day, and he was from that same old school mentality. And I think a big part of the issue was that, jazz used to be America's popular music. And so the guys who were around back in the day, they saw the record industry grow huge by promoting rock and roll. And rock and roll kind of edged jazz out as being the new popular music. And they saw that, look, this music is not as simple, it's not as rich as the music that we make, and yet this is the music that's become popular now, like really, The thing is, though, back in those days, there was the whole young generation because we had the baby boomers.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what that was about was that, young people do tend to like more simple music. And so it made sense that the industry grew huge promoting music to young people. But what's happened is that those same people have now grown up and their tastes are a lot more sophisticated. So even some of the kids in my neighborhood that I grew up with who didn't understand why I was getting into jazz coming from blues and rock and roll, now these are some of my most loyal audiences. They come to see me whenever I'm in town, back in my hometown.
We had a World Cup soccer player in here the other day, Brandy Chastain, and she was talking about how if you really want to get good at soccer, you should basically sleep with the ball, that you should get to know that ball and get comfortable with it on your body. Jimi Hendrix, a guy who slept with his guitar. How close are you to your instrument?
Very, very close. And just the other day, I fell asleep playing. I mean, I'm very familiar with what they're saying. The thing is, when I'm preparing to perform, I get to know the instrument on a physical level. And so I'll hold it, I'll just kind of feel the energy of the instrument, I'll transmit my vibe. I know this is real vague, but into the instrument. I feel the space, the contours of the space. I want to feel really comfortable physically with the instrument itself. And then it's not some separate thing, but it's like an extension of me. It's got to be as effortless as breathing. And by the way, that goes beyond the instrument too. Like if I'm performing on a stage, I want to get to know that stage as well, and even the whole venue where I'm playing. So I will walk around the room, I'll sit in different seats and imagine the concert. I'll pace the stage, how many paces, from stage left to stage right. So when you come to see my show, it's possible that I sat in your seat that afternoon, and that way I feel like the whole room is kind of an extension of me in a way. So when the audience comes in, I feel like I'm welcoming them into my space.
And you've been very in touch with technology. Your first album, Magic Touch, which by the way was on the Billboard charts as #1 spot for 50 straight weeks on the jazz
51
chart.
weeks, yeah.
And that was your debut album. But you used the Macintosh. You incorporated that into the album. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's right. I've been using Mac since they started. And in fact, when Apple came out with the first line of Power Macintoshes, I made the startup sound for their computers. And I was at the Apple headquarters, and they were telling me about these new computers that they were coming out with. And so I asked them a lot of questions about it, because I wanted to make a sound that really kind of signified what the computer was about. So they said, well, this computer is going to be really fast. So I wanted the sound to have a quick onset. It had to come on instantly. And they said, it's going to be much more realistic, like people are going to be watching movies and viewing media on the computer now. This was the beginning of that. And so I used an acoustic guitar because I wanted that realistic sound. Like, this isn't just a computer, this is just something where you can view, and listen to music on, And also, they said, this is a new step for us. We're boldly coming out with something new at a time when people are saying our company isn't going to be around very long. So I wanted a sound that had some attitude, like Apple's here, it's here to stay.
Can you show us what the sound was?
So, yeah, it's a different tuning that I use for that.
Oh, I see, okay.
But basically, it's like, it's kind of like this kind of sound. It's not that chord because the tuning is different. Okay. But like if you do a harmonic like that on a guitar with standard tuning, it's a very rock and roll kind of a sound, and that's where you get that attitude.
And that's funny because you use a very non-conventional way of tuning your guitar, which is it's so funny. All these genius guys, Hendrix, he turned his guitar around to accommodate his style of play. Tell me about your tuning and how it's different.
Yeah, the lowest pitch 4 strings, these 4, are the same tuning as the normal tuning. But then these 2, the higher ones, high pitch, those are tuned differently. And the advantage is, see this chord here? I play it the same way on these strings. I play it the same way on these strings. See, on standard tuning, I'd have to play 3 different fingerings for that chord. So I'd have to memorize so many more fingerings just to play the same notes. So it drastically reduces the number of combinations that you have to memorize.
We're seeing a decline in music programs in schools. Technology is still a very big part of music, but it's not done through the prism of musicianship for a lot of young people. It's just pushing buttons. So do we see jazz being a commercially viable genre within 100 years?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, how do we get there?
One thing is, people always say, jazz doesn't sell, jazz doesn't sell. You always hear that. And yet, here's the amazing thing, is that a lot of those classics are still selling after many years. And so you could have a pop song that sells, 500,000 copies, in 1 year, and you think that this is such a big hit, and then next year everyone's forgotten about it. Meanwhile, people are still buying Kind of Blue from Miles Davis.
Yeah.
People are still listening to John Coltrane, Thelonious Monk, Duke Ellington. So over time, that music is selling numbers that are comparable to the pop music.
Are you seeing young people now with the advent of YouTube and the access that they have to you that maybe you didn't even have when you were young? Is that helping bring the kids that are still interested in music further into the art form?
From my own experience, I've noticed that there's a whole generation of kids that have come up watching YouTube that have discovered my music through YouTube. And I mean, it's kind of a mixed blessing because some of the videos are done on somebody's little cell phone with horrible sound, you know what I mean? But
and you're a perfectionist about sound.
Yeah, right. So, but the thing is, I do like the fact that people are discovering the music. There's a whole jam band scene too, where it's very open-minded. Like I've sat in with some of the musicians who are considered the jam band people. People like Phil Lesh from the Grateful Dead was that was the original jam band, right? The Dave Matthews Band, Humphreys McGee, Mo. These are all great artists that are very open-minded about music, and so they'll bring up someone like me, or like some of my guys like Mark Whitfield. They'll drag us up on stage in a minute because it brings something different to the music, and so their fans have come to appreciate something creative. So I definitely feel like in the jam band scene, there's a lot of, rubbing shoulders with jazz. The other thing is
I would take issue with that because I think that they bring you on stage because they want to play with you because of who you are and what they can learn from you. I mean, jam band.
It's a two-way street. Like for example, I have a lot of respect for Dave Matthews and his music and his songwriting. So when I sit in with the Dave Matthews Band, I'm not looking at it as like, oh, this is my chance to be Mr. Guitar Hero or whatever. The way I approach it is, there's a song here, and the song is really deep and it's got amazing lyrics, and I have to figure out what to play that's going to help that song to come across.
You've mastered and innovated a new technique, which I give you the credit for that. I've seen people trying to do it, but you're the innovator of this technique. Is there going to be a young kid that comes along and shows us yet another way to play this instrument? Or do you think we've exhausted all of the possibilities? Is it mathematically impossible for us to figure out another way that this instrument can be played?
We have not exhausted the possibilities. I'm aware of other things that are out there on the frontier that I can't really do or that I can just barely do. So even just within my own work, there's frontiers that I know about. And then there's stuff that I don't know about. One of the things that's great about guitar is because you're touching the strings, you have a contact with the sound that makes it more personal. So like, for example, my first instrument, piano, which I still love, and I still play piano. Sometimes I play piano and guitar at the same time even. But piano, to me, feels like I'm sitting behind a console pushing buttons, whereas guitar, I'm actually touching the string, and so it is more personal. So for that reason alone, I think that there's more ways to get a sound out of the instrument, and you are going to see more innovations.
I can remember growing up as a kid, my father was a guitarist, and he showed me a video of this guy that played the guitar in such a profoundly unique way, by tapping the strings almost like a piano, and it was you, Stanley Jordan. Back then you had an afro, and man, you changed the game. I could sit here and explain it, but in your words, what is the technique?
Normally when you play guitar, you have one hand holding down the string to select the note, the other one plucks or strums to create the sound, actually play the note. So you have to have two hands just to play one note. But there's another technique called hammer-ons, where if you just hit the string against these frets, the impact creates the vibration. So you can play guitar with just one hand. So what the touch technique is really about is taking hammer-ons and some other related techniques and elevating that into a full approach in its own right. So using this technique, I can play with just my left hand or with just my right hand, or both together.
I can't help but think that there had to be somebody when you were this young kid playing this way, some teacher somewhere, some purist that told you, no, that's not how the instrument is played. You'll never make it playing that way. Did that happen?
Yeah, I was told. I had one guy said, don't do this. You have so much talent. Don't throw it all away. Don't go down this blind alley. But I think, you know, it was something that I had to do because I couldn't make the music in my head on my instrument, and I had to find a way.
And who supported you? Who were the people that said, perfect that?
Well, my teacher, Elroy, was a little skeptical at first, but he saw some of the musical possibilities that came to the instrument with this. So, you know, I think pretty much everybody has realized that it is a serious technique. It doesn't replace the traditional techniques. For example, something like this. You know, you have to strum to do that, you know? So, I mean, but I think that this adds to all of the major ways to play the instrument.
Okay, so what can we expect from you next? You have the album, but where you've been, you started so young and you've had a lot of success. You're a living legend with the guitar. Where can you go from here?
I'm working on a concerto for guitar and orchestra. And ever since I was very young, I've loved orchestral music. I've been studying scores for a long time. And I'm very much influenced by Prokofiev, by Bartok, by Stravinsky, just to sort of give you a flavor of the direction I'm going with this. So when I complete this piece, I look forward to touring and performing this with orchestras. And the concerto is a form where you have a soloist featured against the backdrop of an orchestra. And the sound of the symphony orchestra is, there's nothing else like it. So I look forward to being immersed in the middle of that sound, doing what I do.
You're a very powerful and true artist. I know you're probably going to get a lot of satisfaction being in that experience and just continuing to push the boundaries. And hey, I got to just give you credit. I mean, thank you so much for what you've done for the music. And hopefully there'll be more young people that will be able to come along and be even more inspired by you, because we want to keep it alive.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm teaching more and more, and in fact, after I complete my run at the Iridium, I'm going to be teaching a seminar for musicians, not even just guitarists, but it goes into the secrets of really efficient practicing, which goes beyond just the rudiments. There's a lot of deep stuff.
How do you choose your students?
If you say you're a musician, come on in. There's no barrier to entry. I call it keys to optimal learning for musicians, and it draws from a lot of things. It draws from neuro-linguistic programming, cognitive psychology, Kent Wilber's integral theory. It's so much goes into this, and this is a lifelong study that I've made in, you know, super powerful learning. So I'm going to be teaching that on the 29th, and my website has a link to it, by the way, if people want to pre-register for that.
I'm going to ask you to play us out. There's no better way to end this interview than to have you play. So please give us a piece of that genius.
Okay. This is a piece that I played in a cameo appearance in the movie Blind Date with Bruce Willis and Kim Basinger. It's called Treasures.
All right. Thank you, brother.
Oh, thank you. It's my
Oh,
pleasure.
man.